The foundations are cracking beneath Europe's feet. Migration surges are tearing at the social fabric, with tensions simmering beneath cold, indifferent skies. A chilling survey in Germany revealed that if the country were overtaken tomorrow, only 16% of its men would stand to defend it, just 16. Then, ask yourself, if Germany pledges aid to a distant conflict, what fraction would risk their lives there? The haunting answer is zero. Not a single soul ready to die for a foreign cause. Yet, NATO and the European Union stubbornly crucify themselves on this cross of sacrifice, speaking of unity while the ground shifts beneath their feet. Contrarily, Russia watches with a clear eye, craving none of Europe's chaos. Moscow does not glow with joy at Europe's unraveling, it prefers order, a calculated, predictable future to allocate resources and navigate diplomacy calmly. The myth that Russia cheers the continent's collapse is nothing but fantasy. What does exist now is disorder, rising chaos that echoes through capitals like an ominous drumbeat. NATO is no longer a purely defensive shield. Its strategy leans aggressively forward, relentlessly igniting conflicts near Russia's borders. How could anyone expect Moscow to endure the tightening grip of military infrastructure creeping ever closer? And here lies the bitter truth: if the United States had preserved NATO strictly as a defensive pact, these tensions might have been avoided. No one plans to invade Germany or France. Russia seeks only stable economic ties with Berlin, free from ideological warfare or crippling sanctions. If Europe were whole and NATO strong, these dark scenarios would barely exist. But as fragmentation looms, with old empires reawakening in memory, the impossible becomes inevitable. The continent fractures into new blocks. Recall the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, its echoes haunting the present. How swiftly history fades from collective memory. Turkey offers another haunting parallel. A century ago, the land was a political and religious mosaic dominated by the Caliphate and mighty Ottoman sultans. Beyond the dust of 1925 lies a past now igniting modern conflicts. How long until these spectral empires reshape the battlefield of tomorrow? The pulse of history quickens beneath Europe's trembling surface. Will stability ever return, or is this the storm before the final collapse? What if the map of Europe is about to be redrawn in ways no one dares to speak aloud? Ritter warns that Russia could seize 16 regions of a well-known country with little resistance, while its western lands slip under Poland's control. On paper, this might end the instability and reshape the balance of power. But beneath this calm surface, a far darker storm gathers, one striking not at the edges of Europe, but right at its beating heart. Just when Brussels and Washington clung to the fragile post-war peace, everything threatens to collapse like a house of cards. The grand vision that barred large-scale land wars from the continent seems shattered. The conflict raging in this country shatters illusions of enduring harmony in Europe. Still, NATO leaders chant their old refrain: the alliance has never been stronger. Yet scratch the surface, and fractures emerge everywhere. Many alliances form like cracks spreading through frozen ice. Kosovo, Croatia, Albania forging bonds outside NATO's grasp. Opposing them, Hungary, Slovakia, Serbia shaping a counterweight, even as Serbia remains officially outside the alliance. Ritter points out this splitting is no accident. European politics itself breeds rival camps. What we see now is merely a rehearsal for clashes destined to erupt on European soil. If the European Union begins to crumble, as seems more likely by the day, new conflicts will tear through the continent, as savage and shattering as the one tearing apart that country today. Europe is hurtling headlong into a fresh century of chaos. Will anyone stop the avalanche before the heart of a continent fractures beyond repair? The previous chapter painted a chilling picture. Europe, once a beacon of stability, now rehearses its own downfall. Rising tensions foreshadow conflicts as catastrophic as those shaking the well-known country at its edge. The unraveling of the European Union edges closer, dragging the continent toward a renewed century of chaos. Poland's voice grows louder and sterner. Sharp warnings target radical nationalist groups stirring unrest along its borders. Russian forecasts hint darkly: the only way to neutralize this threat may be handing over the western regions of the troubled country to Warsaw's control. Ritter's tone is laced with irony. Yes, Poland will reclaim what it desires, but history will not rest there. If Warsaw regains the eastern lands, Berlin's long-buried memories will surge to the surface. Names like Silesia, Pomerania, and East Prussia, territories handed to Poland after the Second World War in exchange for concessions to the Soviet Union, will ignite heated debates. Who can believe Germany will quietly accept such a shift? Already, intellectual circles in Germany stir uneasy discussions about revisiting these historic agreements. Though now academic, only a political crisis would launch these debates into government halls, sparking a new and volatile German-Polish conflict. Amid this tremor, a vital question arises: where will the Baltic states stand? Will they align with Poland, a partner tied by temporary interests, or Germany, their economic lifeline? France's position remains a labyrinth of uncertainty, wavering between independence and obligations within the Union's framework. Meanwhile, Britain, true to its complex history, moves decisively. London has sealed a pact with Warsaw, extending its nuclear umbrella over Poland. Should a dispute flare between Warsaw and Berlin, Britain risks being drawn in automatically. Paris has pledged support as well. In response, Germany may confront a stark choice: declare the need for its own nuclear arsenal or seek paradoxical negotiations with Russia. Ritter warns sharply, this domino effect points to a single truth: the Europe we know won't endure much longer. If this madness continues unchecked, the continent will become a battleground where ancient borders are bartered and claimed anew. The old scars will throb with fresh pain, engulfing Europe in conflict far beyond peripheral skirmishes. Can Europe escape this descent? Or is the stage set for a devastating replay of history's darkest moments, echoing beneath the once hopeful skies of the continent? The ticking clock urges a reckoning, and the stakes could not be higher. Amid the echoes of war and the clink of cash registers, a disturbing paradox unfolds. The United States no longer directly bankrolls the conflict in the well-known nation. Instead, it transforms European allies into eager arms buyers, spending billions on weaponry that inevitably finds its way to the front lines. Picture this: as politicians in Brussels deliver heartfelt speeches about peace, they simultaneously seal deals to supply weapons. The theater of absurdity plays on, where protagonists shed tears on stage while the prophets mount backstage. What does this mean for the future? This unsettling reconciliation raises a haunting question: are the very leaders tasked with fostering tranquility enriching a cycle of violence? The reality is stark. The American military-industrial complex smiles as money flows in. Former President Trump crafts a narrative of achievement, as if all this is merely a shrewd business deal, neglecting the human cost behind stark statistics. Losses stack up to a staggering 1,700,000, a reminder of shattered lives and communities. Yet, he treats these numbers as mere data points, devoid of the weight of human tragedy. This leads to an eerie tension in the political arena. On one side, there are those who feel betrayed by the flow of American dollars into what they see as someone else's war. They plead for a halt and cling to the dream of peace. On the other, hawks demand relentless commitment to prolonging the conflict, indifferent to the mounting death toll. Can such a divided approach create a sustainable strategy? Or does it doom all parties to continued suffering? As the pursuit of weaponry rages on, a chilling realization emerges: in the rush for profit, the essence of humanity fades. The argument becomes one of numbers rather than lives. So, what will it take for leaders to shift their focus from financial gain to genuine resolution? When will empathy triumph over economics? The silence of those lost in this tangled web of ambition begs for answers. As this drama unfolds on the global stage, one fact lingers heavily in the air: the cost of continued conflict may yet shatter the fragile veins of cohesion holding Europe and its allies together. If the fighting does not cease, could we see a rising tide of unrest that engulfs not just the battlegrounds but the very heart of Europe itself? The stage is set for a chaotic crescendo. In a world where statistics hide harrowing realities, how long can a nation endure the weight of staggering losses? The toll of a conflict has surged to an unfathomable 1,700,000 casualties. With each month, 9,000 souls vanish, akin to an entire city evaporating, and yet, illusions of strength persist. This year alone, leaks reveal 625,000 lives lost. The haunting reality of battle unfolds before us, mirroring the most ferocious combat since the Second World War. Yet amidst the chaos, leaders chant hollow slogans, clinging to the myth of resilience. The grim truth speaks of a staggering loss ratio, 10-1 or even 15-1. While no one dares to downplay the suffering endured by opposing forces, their losses remain incomparably lesser. In these grueling engagements, the echoes of gunfire and heart-wrenching cries coalesce into a symphony of despair, while victorious illusions blind those in power. Words spoken by leaders often clash with the sobering truths felt on the ground. Stop, one might plea an urgent call to end the carnage, but instead, the rallying cry is for escalation. Promises of 3,000 missiles emerge, but can they even be delivered? Reflect on December 24, when the same leaders condemned arms deliveries, fearing a jump into nuclear brinkmanship. Today, it's a déjà vu, swallowing their own rhetoric, not realizing they're consuming the fabric of credibility. What of the promised 10 Patriot batteries? While they dangle before the weary like fresh fruit, reality dictates an order backlog stretching into years. Israel emits echoes of urgent demand as the United States grapples with its own shortages. The question lingers, is there hope for the embattled nation shrouded in this tumultuous fog? Each unanswered question stabs deeper into the collective consciousness, reverberating with the burden of their past and the uncertainty of tomorrow. Will they truly rise from the ashes, or is this just another chapter in a tale of despair? As the fog thickens, one truth stands firm: the path ahead is paved with chaos, and only time will tell where it leads. What's happening behind the curtain of Europe's alliances? The echoes of a fractured continent grow louder, whispering warnings of a chaotic future. With rival blocs forming, the ideal of lasting peace is on shaky ground. Can Europe really stand united when it has not faced such challenges for over a century? 100 years ago, empires like the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman left indelible marks on history, their stories etched into the fabric of nations. As Ritter draws parallels to these forgotten histories, lingering memories flicker like shadows in the depths of Europe's consciousness. What happens when nations begin to seek alternatives to stability, resurrecting old rivalries? Voices rise as Serbia, Hungary, and Slovakia forge new allegiances, an echo of an ancient order. Despite being a non-Slavic nation, Hungary shares a rich cultural heritage intertwined with those around it. Yet, what of the Croats, Albanians, and Kosovars? Tensions are palpable, creating a powder keg brimming with the potential for conflict. Might the echoes of the past call Austria back into this delicate dance of power? Ritter's sardonic observation suggests that Europe has become overly confident, mistaking its fragile peace as something eternal. How long before the facade shatters, giving way to factions and battles anew? New alliances promise to reshape borders, reignite historical grievances, and write new narratives that have long lain dormant. The worried voices of Brussels proclaim unity, the verses of cooperation ring hollow amid the rising tide of nationalism. Is Europe prepared to grapple with the potential for violence? As NATO finds itself ensnared by its own aggressive strategies, the future feels increasingly uncertain. Can alliances built on fear withstand the pressures of disintegration? Ritter warns, the original vision of the European Union was to eliminate large-scale land conflicts forever. But we are failing. With the specter of conflict rising in the background, who will stand to defend the fragile ideals of unity and peace? As despair creeps into the hearts of nations, will they find the resolve or the desire to confront a future that threatens to destroy what little harmony remains? In a world where the echoes of past empires still resonate, the tides of conflict seem poised to rise again. We often overlook history, but the remnants of the Austro-Hungarian Empire linger, shaping thoughts and aspirations today. As Europe grapples with its identity, one question looms: how long before historical grievances spiral into violence once more? Picture the haunting silence of forgotten lands, now restless with ambition, igniting fears of a new chaos. Just a century ago, the Ottoman Empire ruled vast territories like Syria and Iraq. These bonds of history haven't vanished. They resonate deeply in the hearts of those who remember. Nostalgia fuels the desire for unity, leading to an unsettling realization: people will yearn for the reformation of old alliances, perhaps surrounding the core of the former empire. The burgeoning ties among Serbia, Hungary, and Slovakia reflect these aspirations. What happens when old alliances re-emerge, challenging the fragile balance of contemporary Europe? But while some dream of unity, others prepare for a showdown. Conflicting interests brew hostility, as regional rivals draw lines in the sand. Croatia, Kosovo, and Albania stand watch as Serbia seeks its own legacy. Who will they turn to when tensions ignite? As history teaches us, alliances can quickly shift, leaving the unsuspecting in turmoil. Will Austria reclaim its position, rekindling past ties? And then there's the United States, no longer providing blank checks yet reaping enormous profits from its defense contracts with European nations. Is this truly a withdrawal? Or a clever deception? As America strengthens its foothold through arms sales? The shadows of these transactions loom large, hinting at a deeper entanglement. Amidst all this, could the desire for self-preservation give way to hostilities as nations scramble to secure their futures? As the specter of division rises, NATO's foundations shake, revealing cracks in the facade of unity. In the echoing halls of power, voices proclaim strength, yet beneath the surface, fissures deepen. Will the crumbling alliances among European nations lead to renewed conflict on the continent? As the haunting resonance of history reminds us, the past is never truly buried. How long until desperation gives birth to chaos? The question hangs heavy in the air, charged with the urgency of fledgling alliances reshaping Europe's destiny. The clock ticks, and every choice, every alliance forged carries the weight of history. Can we bear the consequences of a power-stricken continent, or will we seek paths toward collaboration, lest we repeat our mistakes? The threads of history weave a tapestry fraught with tension and anticipation, ever reminding us that in this delicate dance of power, the choices of today will echo for generations to come. Every voice, every alliance forms the fragile framework of Europe's future, teetering on the edge of potential breakthroughs or catastrophic collapse. What will it be? The recent tensions in a renowned country have escalated, igniting fears that Europe could plunge into a cycle of chaos reminiscent of the continent's darkest days. As historic alliances fray and new factions emerge, the question looms, is Europe on the brink of a devastating collapse? In a shocking revelation, a survey in Germany found that only 16% of men would defend their homeland if it faced invasion. A chilling 0% indicated they would willingly sacrifice themselves for the interests of another nation. The foundations of unity are cracking under the weight of these truths. NATO, once heralded as a bastion of collective security, now reveals its darker side, acting as an instrument of aggressive expansion. The alliance is embroiled in conflicts near Russia's borders, prompting speculation about Moscow's reaction. Can Europe afford to provoke a giant like Russia without incurring seismic repercussions? As the NATO strategy unfolds, whispers of discontent grow within its own ranks. Ritter asserts that Russia seeks predictability, not chaos. But Western fantasies paint a different picture, blind to the rising instability gripping the continent. Will this delusion propel Europe towards a catastrophic confrontation, or can it forge a path toward stability? The absence of cooperation leads only to divergence, with nations forming mini-alliances, reminiscent of historical rivalries long thought buried. The fabric of Europe, previously united, now seems to unravel. Memories of the once mighty Austro-Hungarian Empire linger, a haunting reminder of fractured unity. Just as that empire succumbed to internal strife, does the present continent face a similar fate? What alliances will rise from the ashes if Europe continues on this path? A reckoning seems imminent, but against whom will the final lines be drawn? As Ritter warns, the dissolution of current structures hints at impending alliances reshaping the geopolitical landscape. With every passing moment, the specter of historical grievances returns, threatening to ignite new conflicts. If the cycle of disunion continues, where will the loyalties of countries like Germany, France, and the Baltic nations lie? The question remains, can Europe confront its own past without repeating it? The echoes of history resonate, and the showdown looms ever closer. A new chapter of uncertainty unfolds in Europe. As conflicts flourish in a land once deemed stable, the fabric of alliances begins to fray. Flashbacks of war-torn landscapes haunt the memories of those who lived through the horrors. The faint echoes of artillery fire and the acrid scent of smoke linger in the air, forcing us to ask, how much will history repeat itself? In the heart of Europe, unexpected factions emerge. Kosovo, Croatia, and Albania forge a separate military bond. Meanwhile, Hungary, Slovakia, and Serbia rally together, defying the unity touted by NATO. The very ground beneath their feet trembles with the potential for violence. What will happen when the fragile ties that bind Europe begin to unravel? The specter of conflict looms closer, threatening to engulf the continent in a cycle of strife that could last a century. Poland's rhetoric grows increasingly aggressive. As the nation eyes the western territories of its neighboring state, the implications are profound. Will the return of these lands ignite old tensions? The specter of historical claims raises troubling questions. How will Germany react if Poland reclaims its eastern territories? The specter of Silesia, Pomerania, and East Prussia looms large. Could this trigger a new German-Polish conflict? The fragile alliances strengthen, who will the Baltic states align with? As tensions build, France remains on the fence, caught in a web of conflicting interests. The clock ticks ominously as the UK extends its nuclear umbrella over Poland, suggesting that any spat between Warsaw and Berlin could draw in London. What happens when old grievances resurface? The echoes of history remind us that peace is never guaranteed. Germany, pressed into a corner, may demand a nuclear deterrent. Its choices are stark: develop its own capabilities or seek arrangements with Russia. Without immediate intervention, the European Union as we know it faces extinction. The implications of chaos ripple far beyond the continent. The chaos of migration underscores the fragility of the situation. A recent survey reveals a shocking truth: nearly 16% of German men would rally to defend their homeland in the event of an invasion. Just 16. If the call comes to support a neighboring state, how many would lay down their lives? The stark answer: potentially none. Amidst the turmoil, NATO and the EU spiral into a desperate cycle of self-preservation. As Russia watches, the stakes continue to grow. The chaos, far from being desirable, may be a catalyst for predictable outcomes. The contrast between Western fantasies and looming instability is jarring. Each conflict ignites a debate that clouds Europe's future. How long can this facade of unity withstand the pressure before it shatters completely? Will history repeat itself yet again, and who will survive on the battlefield of ideals? The time to act is now, but will Europe heed the warning signs? The unsettling reality is that the continent dances perilously close to the edge of an abyss, where alliances and dreams of peace could be left in ruins. Will we witness a new chapter of chaos, or can a path to stability be reclaimed before it's too late? The answers lie hidden, entwined in the whispers of history. As the world holds its breath, the future of a well-known nation teeters on the brink. Once again, promises of support ring hollow, as the specter of conflict looms larger. Can a nation at war truly expect timely aid when the machinery of production churns at a crawl? Without question, the assurance of 10 Patriot missile batteries remains just that, an assurance. They won't arrive until 2027 or 2028, if at all. But will the nation still exist in its current form by then? And as for the much-touted IRM systems? Those are in their infancy, with serious development commencing only in 2023, and no mass production in sight. It's a cruel irony: these missiles, if they ever see the light of day, cannot be deployed without Washington's green light. Could these so-called reinforcements instead serve as a mere smokescreen? Such is the contention of former President Trump, who sees it as a delay tactic. He believes the calculus will shift within 6 months, paving the way for the nation to acquiesce to Russia's terms, or risk a devastating loss of life. Estimates suggest up to 300,000 casualties. But does he genuinely care? His focus rests on far-reaching negotiations with Moscow, exploring Arctic ventures, and inviting corporations like Chevron back into the Russian oil fold. To him, the fate of this beleaguered country is a bargaining chip in a much broader geopolitical game. Yet, as tensions escalate, the question looms large: what happens when the balance fractures? Amid this backdrop, whispers of deeper conflict simmer beneath the surface. With the fragile alliance of NATO hanging in the balance, could new fault lines emerge? Could the very essence of Europe experience a tremor not felt in decades? As individuals grapple with the consequences of a nation's fate, the echoes of impending chaos reverberate throughout the continent, raising the stakes for everyone involved. But what shocking alliances or unexpected betrayals might arise? Will past agreements shatter under pressure, leading to unforeseen reunions and rivalries? The future remains uncertain, and Europe stands on the precipice, ready to plunge into a new era marked by tumult and strife. As the geopolitical chessboard shifts, will anyone be left standing as the smoke clears? The answers lie in the hands of those unwilling to confront the creeping shadows of history and the burdens they bring along. The heart of Europe beats uneasily, as shadows of chaos gather on the horizon. Just moments ago, we heard that the known nation's conflict with Russia has shattered illusions of lasting peace. Now, powerful forces within America and Europe block any thaw in relations, ready to sacrifice that country to preserve fractured agendas. But what price will this cold calculus extract? Imagine 18-year-old boys sent to battlefields, no longer boys, but casualties erased from history's pages. Is this noble defense, or a ruthless game of profits and power? Behind the terse announcements, faint sounds echo in deserted European streets, ghost towns swallowed by war's relentless advance, their stories buried beneath cold statistics. Amid fading applause and falling curtains, who really wins? Brussels resembles an anxious accountant, frantically trying to patch leaks with borrowed funds. Nearly 200 billion euros of frozen Russian assets lie idle, untouched, and yet unbearably tempting. Faced with a fragile budget and weary taxpayers, these funds are whispered to be redirection targets for the so-called rebuilding of the war-torn nation. But beneath official bravado hides a stark reality: courage, hope, or empty slogans masking desperation? As Ursula von der Leyen steps forward, her promises ring sharp yet hollow: we will find a way. Will these words forge shields or simply shatter illusions? And just as the tension seems unbearable, it pauses. What hidden forces are pulling Europe toward its own unraveling? Will the continent's fragile unity crack under pressure? Or will the next act reveal an even deeper betrayal? The previous chapter revealed a troubling pattern: European leaders boldly champion international law in speeches, yet behind closed doors, they plot ways to bend those very laws. Belgium, with its pivotal financial role, faces mounting legal threats while risking transformation into a global gambling den for billions of euros. Caution wanes, as ambition drives decisions that may sacrifice core principles, and now, a new revelation shakes the fragile balance even deeper. Did you know Europe's famed commitment to law and order often collapses into shadow games where political gain eclipses justice? The air in Brussels corridors carries whispers of deals made not for the continent's welfare, but for power and profit. Amid the scent of polished wood and heavy paper, officials navigate a maze where sharpsuits mask uneasy truths. Valery Urban, guardian of billions, retreats from reckless bets, yet his caution seems drowned by political tides. Behind the grand speeches, a risky scheme advances, channeling vast resources toward a conflict far from Europe's streets, yet pulling the continent ever tighter into its grip. Who truly pays the price when money flows to dangerous ventures under the guise of solidarity? In capital after capital, fear festers: fear of being labeled disloyal, weak, or divided in standing against a looming adversary. Germany, usually the vanguard of these grand projects, now voices unease, hinting at cracks beneath the surface. Still, no one dares to withdraw, too afraid to fracture the fragile anti-Russian alliance. What happens when the very foundations of trust, money, law, unity begin to erode? Is Europe edging toward a financial and political gamble it cannot afford? As Brussels presses on, turning its institutions into laboratories of uncertainty, one question pulses beneath the surface: when the stakes involve not just euros but the essence of sovereignty, who truly controls the game and who will be the first to lose everything? What if the world you thought you knew is already reshaping itself beyond recognition? The numbers tell a rebellious story. Russia's alliances in the East have quietly shattered the decades-old Western financial stranglehold. While claims of crippling sanctions dominate Western headlines, the cold hard truth is starkly different. Russia's pivot to China is no half measure. It's a tectonic shift sending shockwaves through global trade and power balances. Let's recap. In the past 2 years, trade between Russia and China has surged by 40%, now reaching hundreds of billions in volume. Over 80% of this trade bypasses traditional Western currencies, favoring rubles and yuan. This isn't just a symbolic gesture, it's a deliberate unraveling of financial dependence designed to withstand external pressure. The energy sector reveals the full scale of this transformation. The Power of Siberia gas pipeline funneled over 22 billion cubic meters of natural gas from Russia into China last year alone. Plans are underway to push that volume to 38 billion in the near future. Negotiations for a new pipeline route promise even greater stability for Beijing's insatiable energy appetite. Meanwhile, Russian oil exports to China climbed 16% within just 6 months, an unmistakable sign Beijing's securing reliable, long-term supply while Europe wrestles with soaring energy costs. Imagine Brussels, locked in endless debates over sanctions, while Moscow and Beijing sign contracts building fresh energy corridors. This contrast signals a new reality: Western dominance in global decision-making is waning. Crucially, the financial battlefield is also evolving. Russia and China are preparing to launch a clearinghouse for settlements conducted solely in their national currencies. This innovation could effectively sidestep Western banks, crippling the old financial order. After over $300 billion of frozen Russian assets, no nation aspiring to sovereign independence feels safe relying on Western-controlled systems. The era of dollar dominance is fading fast. The share of the dollar in Russia-China trade plummeted to 15%, with the yuan rising as a leading currency in Russian foreign exchanges. What once seemed an empty threat, de-dollarization, has now become an unstoppable trend reshaping global economics for decades to come. So what does this mean for the West? Will they accept losing their grip quietly, or will this seismic shift breed deeper tensions and new conflicts? The game has changed, and the stakes have never been higher. What follows this upheaval? The world is holding its breath. Could Europe's next financial gamble tip the entire continent into chaos? As shadows lengthen over budget crises and political fractures, European leaders face a gut-wrenching choice: drain scarce resources from battered economies, or stake everything on risky investments tied to frozen assets. But who really pays the price when plans unravel? Previously, Ursula von der Leyen's optimistic pledge to channel funds into defense and rebuilding suggested hope. Yet beneath the rallying cry lurks a stark reality: the European Union's coffers are nearly empty, and no member wants to shoulder fresh burdens. This desperate context birthed a controversial idea: transforming frozen foreign assets into a special investment fund designed to bankroll recovery efforts. But is this ingenuity, or recklessness? No one speaks of outright confiscation, a taboo for many within the EU. Germany, Italy, and Belgium immediately raised alarms. The German economy teeters under pressure, Italians count every euro like life or death, and Belgium's vulnerability is acute, hosting the Eurocorps headquarters and courting legal fallout should things falter. To navigate this minefield, officials propose cunning legal frameworks, akin to a reinvented European stability mechanism. Once a lifeline for Eurozone crises, this fund now aims to rescue a war-torn country. The gambit extends beyond EU borders, inviting Canada and the United Kingdom into the fold, nations pressing the bloc to take bolder steps. This strategy sidesteps traditional unanimity rules, effectively muting Hungary's notorious veto and opening avenues to channel billions. The logic? Rebuild infrastructure and restore normalcy in the afflicted land through borrowed fortune. Yet, the very budget figures scream otherwise. An €8 billion shortfall looms for 2026 amidst a Europe drowning in industrial decline, unrest, and fragile public support. Skeptics abound. Economists and ministers alike warn that if the scheme collapses, ordinary Europeans will bear the brunt. The entire model hinges on generating revenue from these frozen assets, not their outright sale. To date, the G7 promised €45 billion in profits from frozen funds, 18 billion of which belong to the EU and are expected by year's end. But will these promises hold, or crumble like a fragile facade? The muffled echoes of political tension ripple through cold conference rooms. Can a union fractured by internal disputes gamble on such a risky venture? In this invisible battlefield of money and law, whose lives will be disrupted when the dice roll against them? What happens when the fragile social fabric tears and hopes evaporate? Europe stands on a knife's edge. Will it craft a rescue or unleash new chaos? The stakes have never been higher. Frozen assets once wielded as blunt political tools are now morphing into a high-stakes financial gamble. The European Commission's shock move to shift billions of euros into a new fund promises freedom to chase greater profits, but with profits come lurking dangers. Could this desperate leap to squeeze out every last penny ignite a disaster worse than anyone expected? The plan, dressed in bureaucratic language as creating room for riskier investments, is essentially a bet to stretch returns beyond the safe, modest yields once mandated by rules. For years, Euroclear, the custodian of these assets, quietly safeguarded them in Belgium's central bank, delivering minimal risk and small, steady growth. Now, that safety net frays. Political pressure to back a certain embattled nation by all means, including financial experiments, overrides caution. Imagine billions of euros swirling like an invisible storm. The stakes? Astronomical. Each 0.1% in returns translates into millions of euros gained or lost. And if this fragile edifice collapses, it won't be the politicians in Brussels who pay the price, it will be ordinary Europeans from Madrid's sun-baked streets to the chilly shores of Helsinki. Voices of warning are growing louder. Valerie Urban, the Euroclear CEO, does not mince words. In the event of failure, it will be everyday citizens who foot the bill, not the European Commission officials. The irony stings. Once, prudence ruled, tiny but guaranteed returns held the line. Today, ideological commitment to solidarity becomes a convenient cloak to mask the risk-shifting burden. Countries like Estonia, long cautious, now lend their voices to sharing risks, demanding Belgium doesn't bear this alone. But will the hope for unity hold when risks soar? Will the lure of financial gain override the growing chorus of fear and skepticism? And what price will Europe's public pay if the house of cards tilts? The Commission openly admits that the ladder of risk climbs higher than ever before, but how far before it all crashes? As the shadows deepen, Europe stands at a financial crossroads, one where the safety once taken for granted could vanish in an instant. What happens when ambition meets uncertainty? The curtain is about to rise, and the stakes have never been higher. More than $300 billion are shifting global balances. But what if the West's grip on the world economy is slipping faster than anyone dared to imagine? As Russia and China forge a new financial alliance, countries once tethered to the dollar's dominance are rewiring their trade and power strategies. Is the Western order unraveling right before our eyes? Recalling the last revelation, the share of the US dollar in transactions between Moscow and Beijing has dropped to 15%. The Chinese yuan now plays a leading role in Russian international trade. But this seismic change is only the surface. Now, India, Iran, Turkey, along with several African nations, are joining this unfolding network. The rise of this new financial reality is something the United States can no longer ignore or dismiss. Western media trembles under this pressure. A famous global financial newspaper warns that Russia and China are creating a bloc beyond Western control. Another major American publication questions the birth of an economic union between two authoritarian giants. Meanwhile, a prominent German news magazine admits that European sanctions failed to crumble Russia's economy as predicted. The irony cuts deep. While pundits debate sanctions effects, numbers tell a different story. Last year, Russia's economy grew by 3.5%. Germany, by contrast, slipped into a technical recession. The familiar scent of uncertainty and tension fills the air across European capitals. Technology trade, too, looks like a decisive battlefield. Despite restrictions on electronics and hardware exports, China remains Russia's prime supplier for machinery, telecommunications, and vehicles. Chinese car imports to Russia quadrupled in the last 12 months, now dominating over half the local market. What Brussels called isolation turned out to be a large-scale shift toward Asian goods. In exchange, Beijing secures access to Russia's vast natural resources and energy sectors, a crucial shield against U.S. pressure. The salty sea breeze around the Indochina waters carries the clatter of American warships staging provocative operations, while calls for military support of Taiwan grow louder. In this atmosphere, Moscow's alliance offers Beijing a vital deterrent. Before, Washington tried to keep Europe and Asia separate in its calculations. But today, Russia and China's synchronized strategy, a nightmare scenario complicating US and NATO planning beyond measure. Adding striking fuel to the fire, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization now invites not only its core members but also guests seeking alternatives to Western alliances. India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Central Asian states all participate directly or maintain close ties. What does this new alignment mean? Will the West's fading economic dominance create a vacuum filled by rising powers? Or will it spark fierce rivalries that reshape the global chessboard? Listen closely. The quiet shift in financial tides might be the first tremor before an earthquake that redefines international order forever. What if the war that divides Europe today is not just a distant battle but the echo of a continent unraveling at its seams? Across capitals and corridors of power, a silent fracture grows deeper, threatening to redraw borders and ignite conflicts beneath the surface of uneasy alliances. Is this merely instability at the edges, or the prelude to chaos at Europe's core? Previously, we observed how the European Union's cautious steps reveal a fragile system, teetering under the weight of risky policies. Fear of isolation traps nations in a chain of dependencies, eroding trust in property rights and casting doubts on the West's narrative of Russia's financial strangulation. Despite sanctions, Russia pivots eastward. China becomes its lifeline. Now, the narrative shifts dramatically with an event charging global attention, the looming visit of Vladimir Putin to Beijing. A meeting dubbed the visit of the century by Moscow itself. Why such weight on a single trip? Because it occurs against a backdrop few anticipated, over 20 world leaders converging for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. In a spectacle rippling with power and symbolism, Putin emerges not as a regional player, but a pivotal figure. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation, voices hushed, cameras fixed. The 4 days from August 31st to September 3rd are packed with negotiations that go beyond formalities and photo ops. Kremlin spokesmen emphasize these talks bear tangible outcomes, backed by concrete figures and vested interests. No empty phrases here, there is gravity in every handshake, every nod. Peking orchestrates an elaborate program where every gesture echoes alliance and mutual resolve. Alongside summit deliberations, Putin will hold separate dialogues with Chinese leaders. The crescendo, honor at an 80th anniversary parade commemorating China's victory over Japan, an unmistakable message broadcast globally. This is more than ceremony. It's a statement of strategic solidarity between two giants standing visibly united. The delegation Moscow sends is no afterthought. Ministers and corporate heads responsible for energy, finance, high-tech, and industry accompany Putin, signing instruments that foretell long-term transformation. The past 2 years have seen a surge. Russia-China trade has climbed 40%, now reaching tens of billions of dollars. An overwhelming 80% of settlements are already conducted in rubles and yuan, reshaping monetary ties beyond old Western dominions. Yet, as this eastern pivot gains momentum, a question lingers: can Europe absorb this tidal shift without cracking? Or is this alliance a trigger for a cascade of upheavals on the continent's doorstep? The scent of upheaval sharpens in the air. The sound of shifting alliances whispers in the corridors. Europe faces a question: will it adapt or fracture under the relentless pressure of these seismic changes? Hold your breath. The next move in this high-stakes game is about to break. In a high-stakes game of international law and finance, Europe teeters on the brink of chaos. While the European Union loudly champions the rule of law, their actions tell a different story, especially when it comes to frozen assets. As legal experts warn of impending lawsuits, the EU's eagerness to engage in risky legal maneuvers reveals desperation. What will happen if this gamble fails, leaving taxpayers in France, Germany, and Italy to bear the brunt of the fallout? The irony could not be clearer. While Brussels discusses the potential confiscation of assets, they lack the unity or legal framework to actually proceed. The mere act of deliberation serves a dual purpose: an attempt to maintain political pressure on Moscow while avoiding admission of their own strategic failures. As the specter of negotiations looms, fueled by figures like Donald Trump, is Europe poised to become mere spectators in a game they once played? Frozen assets, once a powerful bargaining chip, now resemble the last desperate bet of a gambler risking it all at the roulette table. With foreign ministers set to convene in Copenhagen, the impending discussions are steeped in urgency. They know that there is no real resolution in sight, yet the facade must go on. They must appear committed. This situation marks a dangerous transition, as frozen assets, previously tools of coercion, now become pawns in a high-stakes financial game. As the European Commission proposes the creation of a new fund to manage these assets with greater flexibility, one must wonder, are they truly playing their cards right? Or are they simply risking everything on a doomed strategy? The sound of ticking clocks reverberates in Brussels, a constant reminder that the next move could redefine the continent's future. Will the EU gamble its last chips in pursuit of dominance, or will the tides of history sweep them away? In a world teetering on the brink, one question looms ominously: what if the financial gambles of Europe plunge millions into despair? The reliance on profits from frozen assets hits a nerve. With major decisions prioritized over long-term stability, citizens increasingly worry that their lives hinge on unpredictable investments. Amid the fervor, discussions arise from the G7's recent commitment to channel a staggering €45 billion from these frozen funds. Among this, €18 billion is earmarked for the European Union, promised by year's end. But as the dreams transform into reality, an unsettling truth unfolds: resources are nearly depleted, yet no nation is willing to shoulder new obligations. This sets off alarm bells. Venturing into risky investments appears tempting, yet fraught with potential disaster. The stakes have never been higher. While European leaders proclaim steadfast commitment, the cold, hard numbers tell a different tale. There's simply no sustainable financial foundation for long-term support. Eastern European voices like Estonia's Foreign Minister Kirli Kivasila raise red flags, boldly declaring, "Why can't we tap into these assets?" Their fervor is met with skepticism from the cautious hearts of Western powers such as Germany and Italy. Each hesitant step echoes the imminent threats looming over the continent. Consider this: if complications arise, European taxpayers may bear the brunt of these financial miscalculations. The whispers of discontent grow louder as national treasuries risk repaying losses while collateral damages ripple through society. Citizens might soon question who truly benefits from these high-stake maneuvers, particularly when coupled with stringent legal challenges from Russia, which has warned it would respond fiercely to any breaches of international law. As European media openly debate these perilous strategies, alarm bells start to ring. Can the bloc navigate this treacherous sea, or will it capsize under the weight of its own ambitions? The tension is palpable, every bold claim about unity masks an underlying dread. The daily struggles of citizens across France, Germany, and Italy hint at a brewing storm. How long can the chorus of optimism persist before reality intervenes? The clock is ticking, and the repercussions of failure might extinguish the dreams of unity that many still cherish. Europe stands at a crossroads. One path leads to potential chaos, the other to an uncertain salvation, but which will it take? Previous segment reminded us how Brussels plans to share the burden of risks alongside Belgium, the official guardian of frozen assets. The stakes grow higher as the European Commission seeks to turn seized Russian funds into profitable ventures. But how far is Brussels willing to push this financial tightrope? Surprisingly, even countries once distant from direct Russian tensions have voiced support. Spain, traditionally wary of sanction policies, has shifted gears and backed this daring scheme. What does it reveal about the shifting winds in Europe's political landscape? Is loyalty to the collective now overriding cautious sovereignty? The Brussels elite have transformed the strategy into a universal Swiss Army knife, tackling energy crises, managing migration flows, and now gambling with frozen assets. The idea isn't without history. Data from last year showed these frozen reserves yielded barely €3 billion annually, far too meager for the ambitious aid goals promised to the embattled nation. So, the solution: amplify returns through riskier investments. But here's the catch: every plunge into volatile markets erodes the structure's stability. This isn't just dry policy, it's a high-stakes gamble with money belonging to owners barred from intervention. Imagine players betting with chips taken from an absent opponent's stack, who's really controlling the game. Media outlets haven't held back. Some cynically dub it financial roulette, a casino where the house plays with frozen capital it cannot fully govern. Remember the Pandemic Recovery Fund? Transparency there remains clouded. Raising eyebrows about Brussels' fiscal stewardship. Now, the narrative turns more perilous. Handling funds tied directly to geopolitical conflict injects a layer of political tension that's impossible to ignore. Could these financial experiments ignite new fractures within the European project? If profit becomes the goal, what crisis might arise when the losses surface? As tension rises, one question echoes: is Europe quietly sacrificing its own stability to appear united against an external foe? Beneath speeches proclaiming rule of law and order, is this fragile balance beginning to crumble? The faint crackle of a storm gathering just beyond the horizon may soon grow into a thunderous reckoning. What if this daring financial bet isn't just about money, but a prelude to unraveling alliances? In the shadows of the political theater, the true risks may be far deeper and far more dangerous than any balance sheet can show.